From Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, members. You know, I'm used to talking about environmental impact statements and the county's transit improvement board. So this is difficult. It's very difficult because for each of us, this issue is so personal. And so I want to share with you a couple of personal stories, which I think cut to the core of what we're discussing today. A couple of years ago, the Nobel Prize-winning author Elie Wiesel spoke in town. An amazing guy, won the Nobel Peace Prize, raised the world's consciousness about human rights. But in this talk, he said something so simple and so profound, which I believe speaks to us today. He said, life is really about certain moments. We go through our day and maybe it's not very spectacular, but every so often there's a moment. The birth of a child, sitting with a parent in their last throes of life like I had to do twice in the last 11 years. Maybe it's even something as simple as being with a child during their christening, their bar mitzvah, winning a swim meet. Moments. A wedding. A sacred moment. A funeral. These are the moments that define our humanity. And so we have before us in the Minnesota House of Representatives legislation that discusses how people experience these moments that define our humanity. And legislation that says that we are defining how these moments are experienced and that people experience them in different ways. We're saying, we're defining as a government how we experience these moments. Two stories. One, they involve constituents of mine. Jim and Dwayne are residents of Kingfield neighborhood in Minneapolis in my district. During my freshman year, I met with them. A moment, really, for me, meeting them to hear their story for the first time. They told me of their fidelity to each other, that they had been together at this point over 15 years. And they told me of one week in 2002 where Dwayne became very, very ill. Jim took him to the doctor. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia. Jim came home. They prescribed antibiotics, as what often happens in this situation. Dwayne came home with Jim, and Dwayne didn't get any better that week. And as a matter of fact, they found blue coloring under his nails. And Dwayne, who'd been involved in the healthcare field, knew this was something very, very serious. And so Jim took him again to the hospital, to the doctor. And so this is when I found the story became very troubling and very powerful. Because at that time, Dwayne was running 105.7 fever. His breathing was labored. So they immediately got him in an ambulance to North Memorial Hospital and ran a series of tests. Jim really had no access to the medical information. A partner for 15 years. The doctor wouldn't tell him he wasn't next of kin. A moment, a life and death moment. If it was a man and a woman, there would be no issue. There would be no discussion. The doctor would be freely exchanging medical information and answering Jim's questions. Well, Jim and Dwayne just 2 weeks earlier had filed some legal papers so that there were some power of attorney privileges. But Jim didn't bring the paperwork. A life and death situation in a hospital, he needed to have paperwork in order to have a simple conversation about his life's partner's condition in a hospital. His T-cell count was down to 19. He barely had any immune system. The cytomegalovirus that invaded his body was on the march. He was vulnerable to any kind of viral disease at that point. Well, I think you know now what the diagnosis was. And so, miraculously, over a period of 11 days in that first hospital visit, Dwayne got better. He went home, but then the problems for Jim as his caretaker were compounded. In this crisis situation, their family couldn't keep up with the bills, so creditors were calling. Why hasn't Dwayne paid his Dayton's bill? Jim had no legal standing to negotiate or make sure that that issue could be resolved. His partner, the man he loves, is on oxygen. The creditors wanted him to come to the phone and discuss it. He's on oxygen. What could Dwayne do? What could Jim do in that situation? And it went on and on from there. The people that were responsible for maintaining the oxygen machine, Jim couldn't do much to talk with them, to negotiate with them, to make sure that that machine was properly maintained over time. Dwayne slowly got better. He went to work, and I want to say that these are two hard-working state employees who just recently retired. Dwayne got sick again. Things deteriorated. Another 2-week hospital visit. Well, the story does have a happy ending. Dwayne's feeling much better now. I think in part because of the loving care that Jim gave him. And in 2006, Jim and Dwayne got married in Vancouver, Canada. They had been through so much together, supported each other, loved each other, were faithful and are faithful to each other. And in 2006, they had the opportunity to consummate this very meaningful, committed relationship in which they both felt so much security and comfort in each other. And just this month, they celebrated their 25th anniversary together and took a cruise up to Alaska. And when they crossed the border into Vancouver, Canada, the customs officials let them come in as a couple. And you know, I just recently traveled during our break to Israel, and I wouldn't have even thought about how important that is when we went to customs and we all approached the customs desk with our passports together as a family. I wouldn't have even thought about my wife going separately, my kids going separately. We approached as a family. It was so meaningful for them. Jim told me the story about how when they crossed the border, they were welcomed warmly when they said, yeah, we were married here in Vancouver. And so I just want to quickly end with one more story about a couple. Many of us know my Senator Scott Dibble. And I was so honored when Scott invited me to California in August of 2008 to be a guest at his wedding, his legal wedding in California, to his partner, Richard. As Elie Wiesel would say, a moment, quite a moment. I remember arriving at the hotel, a beautiful location on the beach in Laguna Beach, California, in Orange County. What a joyous moment. When the pastor said, "Do you take thee, Scott?" And Richard said, "I do." Scott, do you take Richard? I do. And with those 3 letters, I do, they were making a lifelong commitment to each other's happiness. They were expressing their love, their comfort in each other, their security in each other, their faith in each other. And before God and their parents and their friends and their uncles and aunts and cousins, we celebrated a joyous union, a wedding. People who love each other deeply, making a lifelong commitment to each other, to be responsible to each other, to support each other. What a moment that was. I have some pictures of that beautiful day. Here's the couple in their first dance. They're walking down the aisle. Here's a shot of the minister administering the vows, the sparkling Pacific Ocean in the background. And here's a shot they took, I think, either right before or right after that beautiful, sacred moment. And so, members, these stories I told, I think, capsulize what's at stake here. With 3 words, or with 2 words, 3 letters, I do. We ought to be not limiting the ability of couples to say those 3 letters today on the House floor. So I'm voting no. And I want all to understand that in voting no, we are voting so that Scott and Richard and Jim and Dwayne and countless others can say, I do to a life of commitment. I do to a life of love. I do to a life of responsibility. I do to creating a secure family and future for each other. Why? Why would we deny that moment of happiness, that moment of glory that so many of us have had the opportunity to experience? That is what's at stake here. Join me in saying, I do.